This conference will now be recorded.
All right, we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. Roll call.
Mr. Alashewski.
Here.
Ms. Bendixson.
Here.
Ms. Bernal Leon. Here. Ms. Blanchard. Here. Ms. Brown. Here. Ms. Burks. Mr. Cooley.
Here.
Dr. Day.
Here.
Mr. Fitzpatrick. Dr. Flewelling.
Here.
Mr. Glicksberg.
Here.
Ms. Hammer Levy.
Here.
Dr. Hirschhorn. Ms. Kessler. Ms. Kroll. Mr. Miller.
Here.
Dr. Moyer. Ms. Powers. Here. Mr. Pratt.
Here.
Mr. Prayman. Mr. Provenzano. Ms. Sussingham.
Here.
Here we have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. We have just one minor adjustment to the agenda, and that is the announcement of the new Citizen Advisory Committee co-chairs, Robin Sussingham and Megan Blanchard, and they're both here today. So Megan's sitting over here, and Robin is right up there by Maya. So welcome. Really glad to have you here, and congratulations. Thank you. All right, are there any other changes to the agenda? The minutes from the November 9th, 2023 Management Board meeting. Any discussion on that item? None. I think that's an action item.
Need to.
We do need to,
Yeah.
okay. Do we have a motion to accept the minutes from the 9th?
So moved.
Second? Second. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion passes. General comments from the citizens? Megan, would you like to say anything? Sitting there.
I'm just excited to be serving with Robin on the CAC committee. In particular, we did some updates to the Bambini grant that we're excited to present to you guys today.
Thank you. Any other citizen comments online? Okay, hearing none. We're going to move on to the annual program-wide audit with Julie Davis.
Yep, as we typically do each February at this board meeting, we bring the annual audit for prior fiscal year 2023. And Julie Davis and Elise Leach from Rivera Gadamer and Company will be providing the overall summary of the audit. Give me just a second, I'll cue your presentation up.
Thank you all. Hi, I'm Julie Davis. I'm a shareholder with Rivera Gadamer and Company. With me today is Elise Leach. She's a supervisor within our firm, and we're here today to go over the results of the audit for fiscal year 2023. We met with everyone back in November to kind of go over our service plan, which was kind of going over the timeline, what we were planning to look at, and what our general plan was for the audit. I'm pleased to say that we're here on time and on schedule, just as we presented to you all back in November. So everything went according to plan, which is always a fantastic thing to have. I also want to say thank you to Ed, Maya, Jessica, Jill, the entire team here. Getting through the audit is a lot of hard work. There's a lot of information to be pulled, a lot of questions to get through on top of the normal day-to-day functions that they work with. So I just want to thank everyone for all their hard work and efforts in getting us here on schedule today. We got started with the bulk of the audit process back in November. And with that, we really worked through most of November and part of December, wrapping up and reporting in January. And we're here today to go over those results, which we'll start off with on page 1 of our report with you all today. So this is just a highlight of the audit reports and our required communications. The full copies should have been provided to you all as well ahead of time. But if you have any questions, feel free to stop me through the presentation. Top of the page, probably the most important thing is our opinion on your financial statements. And I'm pleased to report that we are prepared to issue an unmodified or a clean opinion on the audit of the financial statements. And what that means is that anyone who is making a decision based on those financials can rely on them to make an informed decision. As I mentioned earlier, we had full cooperation from the entire team. We had no disagreements on any accounting matters, and we had full access to the books and records. Our audit was performed in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards, And what that means is our objective is to provide reasonable but not absolute assurance that your financial statements are free of material misstatement. And what that really means, it's a lot of language and you're like, what do you mean not absolute assurance? It's just because we don't look at every single transaction. We use a risk-based model in our audit process. We use a lot of sampling throughout the audit process as well, and we don't look at every single transaction. Our responsibilities are also under government auditing standards, where we look at compliance with laws and rules and general matters over compliance. And then we also have responsibilities under the uniform guidance, which is a single audit. So that's where we dive into some of your funding contracts more specifically and look at compliance not only with the contract itself, but also with federal government regulations on that compliance. This year, your major program, much like what it has been in the prior years, was the National Estuary Program, which is about $560,000 of expenditures this year. And that was out of about $900,000 in total federal awards that you all received. Moving on to page 2 is really some other matters and a summary of all of our other reports. What we're going to talk about in just a little bit is we did have a finding in internal controls over the financial close process. I'm going to go over that in a little bit more detail shortly. And really down below there is really all of our other summary reports. As I mentioned, those other standards that we follow, the government auditing standards, uniform guidance, things of that nature. We issue an opinion on your compliance with those standards, and we're pleased to report that those are also all unmodified opinions. Moving on to page 3 is just some significant estimates. This is part of our required communication with you all. Estimates are inherent in the financial statements, and these are the significant ones that we identified during our audit process. The allowance for doubtful accounts, actuarial assumptions used in the pension standards as participation FRS, as well as the fair value of investments held. And we concluded that all the estimates are reasonable in the circumstances. And then on page 4, this is a highlight of other matters. Those top items are the big ones that everyone's probably always most concerned about. And I'm pleased to report that we had no illegal acts or fraud noted. I will say if we had anything huge to report to you all, anything concerning, we would have reached out long before this meeting and we wouldn't have had any surprises with anyone here today. So please report that those big 2 items, there's nothing to go over. There were some changes in accounting policies. There was a new standard adopted this year. That standard, which is subscription-based IT arrangements, it's much like leases that was adopted last year. And that did not have any significant impact on the financials. Those next 2 items, which are significant disclosures and significant audit findings, I'm going to dive into a little bit here. The financial statements, we ended up working with management and coming up with a prior period adjustment. And really what happened this year, and actually what happened in prior years, which affected this year, was there was some reconciliations of grants that just had a lot of carryover dollars that were being built up and built up. And once we really dove into revenue recognition for this year, and picking some samples, we identified a certain grant that was actually ended this year that had some built up expenditures that were being carried over that should have been written off in prior years. So what happened was last year revenue was overstated and receivables were overstated. So we worked with management to correct that this year in the financial statements. So when you read through that, that is a disclosure that's described in your financial statements. Additionally, we worked with the team here as well as your new outsourced accountant to really develop a new process to make sure that this doesn't happen in the future. From what we understood, this has happened in the past. And so we really worked to help them develop a process to identify these issues so that this does not happen again in the future. I really think that new process, along with your new accountant, looking at things a little differently, are really helping this. And so I'm really proud that management was very responsive to the comments and really worked hard to make sure that we addressed it pretty quickly during the audit process. With that, we had no other matters to report to you all, but I'm going to turn it over to Elise, who's going to touch on a highlight of the numbers for you real quick.
Thanks, Julie. Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Elise Leach, and I'm going to briefly go over the summary financial reports with you guys. So starting off with the statement of net position, cash and investments decreased this year due to using funds for operations. You'll also see that receivables decreased this year due to the timing of grant payments received, as well as some contracts ending in late 2022 and early 2023. Then you'll also see that capital assets and right to use assets decreased due to current year depreciation and amortization. Deferred outflows of resources also decreased this year, but this number is determined by the annual actuary report for FRS. Looking at liabilities, liabilities decreased this year, mainly with the right to use lease liability as payments were made in accordance with the lease agreement, and net pension liability. Deferred inflows of resources increased this year, but this is also determined by the annual actuary report for FRS. Looking at total net position ended at $1,767,000 with $694,000 restricted for the specialty license plate expenditures. Moving on to the next page. This is your statement of activities or your income statement. Changes for services or charges for services decreased this year as the prior year included revenues related to the Bay Area Scientific Information Symposium, as well as there were no in-kind revenues this year. Operating grants and contributions remain consistent with last year, with total revenues decreasing by $687,000. Expenses also decreased this year by about $132,000, mainly related to there not being any in-kind expenditures and decreases in contract services, very similar to revenues. And with that, there was a decrease in net position by $283,000. Do you guys have any questions with the numbers? Okay. Thank you.
That's our presentation for today, and we'd be happy to answer any questions.
No.
I like quiet rooms.
Look at our,
It means we did
I'm
our
trying
job.
to decide if it's lack of caffeine or if it's numbers.
It's both. It's both.
All right, are there any questions?
I have one general question. So that's, I'm looking at, it's a summary, right? I mean, everything is rounded to the thousands. Is that's standard? Yeah. It's just,
For presentation purposes, it is. In the actual audit itself, it is only rounded to the dollar. Figured most people at the board level don't want to talk about a $10 difference.
Anything else? No? All right, so recommendation.
I just want to thank Julie and Elise and their team for the smooth audit this year. My team as well, Jessica and Jill helped out tremendously this year with the audit as well as Maya. So it's always something to tackle at the beginning part of the new fiscal year, but I think we made it through just fine.
All right, well, the action recommended is to recommend the policy board accept the 2023 annual program audit report and financial statements. Do we have a motion?
moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? All right, motion passes. Thank you very much.
Very much.
All right, quarterly financial report.
Page 10 of the board packet is a summary of our overall activity for the new fiscal year, which began October 1 of 2023. I think as I've briefed some of our management and policy board members, just wanted to highlight where we're at in terms of overall activity, in terms of revenues and expenditures. We're actually right on the mark in terms of revenues, where we want to be about 25% of what we projected that in the initial budget that we adopted last August. We're about 800,000 through December 31st in terms of collected revenues. And one thing just to highlight is 2 unexpected donations to the program came in during the quarter, about around $70,000 in total. It's actually going to be put towards the 2024 Tampa Bay Environmental Restoration Fund call that's currently open. So that was good news that we received these funds, and Jessica was instrumental in securing some of those new foundation dollars that we received from the program. You'll notice also on federal grants, we usually typically wait till the audit is finalized to do a major drawdown. The one drawdown we did in October was to close out a grant that was set to expire on October 31st. So that's the minor 2,400 draw that we did there. But we'll probably catch up over the next quarter in terms of expenses we incurred on our majority of our work plan grants over the next quarter. Moving on to expenses, we're a little bit lower than what we were typically at for being a quarter way through the new fiscal year, only about 480,000 of expenses so far. And that's That's pretty typical at the beginning part of the year. We're expecting to catch up again through the subsequent quarters. The only thing I just wanted to mention related to expenses for volunteer services, you see that we're way above what we anticipated in the initial budget, and that's primarily due to some angler survey incentives that we purchased to help support some environmental and angler surveys out on the Skyway Bridge with the new regulations. It's actually terminal tackle that prescribes to the new regulations and trying to encourage anglers to participate in some of the surveys and getting their perceptions on the regulations that have been imposed over this past fall. So I'll come back to the boards at the May meeting and propose a mid-year budget amendment to reflect those realized expenses this fiscal year. And again, it's not that we don't have these grant funds to support that. It's just a matter of where we recognize them in any particular fiscal year. So again, I'll propose a mid-year budget amendment at the May meeting. The same can be said for postage. We're a little bit ahead of where we anticipated. We only earmarked about $250 for postage for this current fiscal year. We know that we're going to be doing additional mail-based surveys, so that will likely increase this fiscal year. So I'll also propose a mid-year budget amendment at the May board meeting. But other than that, I anticipate us to probably catch up on the contracts and consultant service charges over the next the remainder of the fiscal year, and you'll see that reflected in subsequent quarterly reports. I'll be happy to entertain any questions, but that's where we're at through December 31st, 2023, in terms of our budget projections related to the initial budget adopted last August.
Just curious, did you say, or can you say where the donations came from?
One was from MBJ Foundation and the other was from the Community Foundation of Tampa Bay. The Community Foundation has donated to the program in the past to T-Birth. I think it was a little bit unexpected that they were going to donate again, but it was some seed funds through, forgetting the name of it.
The Pollinator Fund. So this was actually an individual who reached out to us, directed from FWC, who was interested in some of the water quality trends in Old Tampa Bay. And she was impressed by the kinds of work that we do as a program and wanted to support it. And the Community Foundation manages her trust. So.
That's fantastic.
So we're hoping those will be long-term sustained commitments, at least to the T-Birth program. And we'll see through subsequent years if the foundation continues to support that. But so far, so good, yeah.
Any other questions on the report? All right, so we recommend, the recommended action is that the policy board accept the quarterly financial report. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Do we have a second? Second. Any further discussion on this item? Hearing none. All those in favor? Any opposed? The motion passes. Draft 2025 US EPA work plan. Maya.
So we're presenting this information to you a little bit differently this year, but as many of you may be familiar, the annual work plan, this represents a portion of the income that comes into the program. So it's a portion of our overall total budget, and it's what comes to us through Section 320 of the Clean Water Act from EPA, and then it's matched with your local donations. Each year we have to put together a plan for how we're going to spend those funds. That plan includes several different elements, including an executive summary, our accomplishments, a summary of the ongoing projects for the prior 5-year period, summary of our external grants and the other portions of our program, as well as the new projects we propose for the upcoming fiscal year that will be incorporated into this work plan will be incorporated into the grant application to the US EPA. So in years past, what we've tried to do is come to you with a nearly complete work plan. But as I just explained, there's a whole lot of information in that work plan, and it can sometimes be a lot to wade through. So what we wanted to do this year is present to you what we think is the most salient new information at this meeting, which is what we're proposing for the new project section of that work plan. So you all can have a little bit of time to digest what we are proposing. you can work with us over the next couple of months so that when we come back to you at your May meeting and we present the entire work plan that includes all of those other sections for our accomplishments, the ongoing work, the other grant programs, all of those things, you'll have a good idea of what's old and what's new, and it's maybe a little bit easier to digest. There's a couple of things I want to highlight. So I think Ed has pulled up, so we've presented this as a handout, so you can see a outline summary of the projects that we're proposing. On the technical project side, we're proposing many projects that are familiar to you. The ongoing benthic seagrass and hydrologic monitoring, although I ask you to note that amount that we are allocating towards that project is much higher this year, and that's in response to a request from EPC, whose laboratory costs have been escalating, and so they're asking for additional support to offset their contribution. We're also looking at continuing to implement the Habitat Master Plan with on-the-ground projects that are helping us reach some of the targets that are identified in that plan. We also want to continue working on our indicator development and report card. So we've got several, we had a project in last year's work plan that began that, but we know there are additional indicators and open science workflows that need to be developed. So we are proposing to continue that with additional funding and new indicators. And then we have critical fisheries monitoring, which is our attempt to take some of the work that we've done on the Necton Index, but apply it to our important riverine systems that are contributing the freshwater flow to Tampa Bay. On the education and outreach side, I think we're pretty proud that we have good parity between the sort of two sides of the house this year. We're proposing to continue the ongoing Give a Day for the Bay types of volunteer events. We also have participatory science events and activities that are planned to engage the community to better inform them and enhance the science literacy around topics that are important to the Bay. And our intention is to basically alternate participatory science type of projects with experiential education projects. So last year, instead of participatory science, we were funding experiential education, so kayak trips, things that get people out on the water to fall in love with the Bay. And this year we're trying to make science fun. So that's what we're proposing there. We have ongoing program branding and marketing costs. And then we have a Baywide customer satisfaction survey. This is something that will help us understand the pulse of the community in terms of the work, not only that we do, but that you all do for your respective organizations with respect to the environment and the Tampa Bay watershed. Continuing on with supporting our variety of different behavior change projects. And then we're also proposing to support some of the private sewer lateral rebate programs and the implementation in the communities. So there are several things that we've conceptualized there, and we know that there are a handful of those private lateral rebate programs that we could support. And so we're proposing to put some money to either help with reporting and tracking the effectiveness of those rebate programs, offset some of the costs, or potentially and even enhance the amount of the rebate, particularly in those areas of the community that are both underserved, overburdened, and that are experiencing high inflow and infiltration. There are write-ups for each of these projects, so I encourage you to take a look at them. If you have comments, things that you would like to see, changes you'd like to make, please feel free to make those comments directly in the Google Doc or reach out to me, and we'd be happy to incorporate your thoughts or proposed revisions in the final work plan that comes before you for your approval at the May meeting. I want to call your attention to this in-kind partner action plan implementation project. Usually the cash match that you all provide through your member dues for the interlocal agreement don't fully make up the one-to-one match that we need for the EPA grant. And so one of you usually proposes a project that you have going on in the year that you know will spend out somewhere around $250,000. We don't identify those projects for you. This is the time where we ask you, what do you have it's in the pipeline that you know is a solid, sure bet in terms of something that can spend that $250,000 over the life of the grant. So it doesn't have to be, your most exciting or innovative project. We're really looking for something that you know is going to spend out to that $250,000 level so that we can make our full match for the grant. So if you have a project like that, please reach out to Ed, myself, Jill. We would love to include that a little write-up in there and make sure that we can bring down all of the resources that are available to us. And on that note, I did just want to say there is some uncertainty with the federal budget this year. And so right now, this work plan is planned and built, assuming that we'll have flat funding, so $850,000 coming from the federal government. But we don't know that amount's not locked in. We should have a better idea in March what our funding situation would be. And Ed, I don't know if you have anything that you want to add to that, but that's where we're coming from a planning perspective on this grant.
Yeah, as Maya mentioned, there's still a lot of uncertainty at the congressional level in terms of overall appropriations. I think there's an agreement on top line numbers for the funding the major federal agencies, and they're not as dire cuts as what was proposed last fall. So we'll see what the final numbers are for the National Ice programs. And the only thing, I want to say is that we continue to have pretty good bipartisan support. There were bills introduced last summer that actually showed an increase to the National Ice programs. And as Maya mentioned, I think at best, we should see level funding, or at the very least, we should see level funding. At best, we might see a little bit of bump depending on what the final appropriation numbers are for EPA and the programs delegated to EPA. So again, this is a draft, and if there's any need to tweak the total funding amounts, we'll bring that back to the May board meeting for finalization.
So with that, I'd be happy to entertain any comments or questions.
So with the Habitat Master Plan implementation, there's a list of projects. Is that giving you options of which ones to target? So you've got some flexibility on where the spending is going to go, depending on which projects are ready to move forward?
Yes, we find a lot of our partners aren't really ready to identify a project that's going to move at this point, particularly for the amount of funding that we have available. And so we put in some examples, and then we worked to see which project is ready to go once the funding is actually available. But if there are suggestions for other options that you know of that might be a good fit for that category and that funding level, please let us know, and we would be happy to include that. Most of our work is here to support you all, so we're looking for you to be sort of a conduit for what the best projects and the best ideas are that we can funnel and support to. So thank you.
On the in-kind project, what's the timing need for the spend out of those funds?
We have 5 years, but we would prefer something that'll spend out in the first 2 to 3.
Yeah, so October 1, 2024, ideally the first fiscal year, it's October 1, 2024 through September 30th, 2025.
And on the Baywide customer satisfaction survey, how do you target? It says Baywide, so how are you targeting with that?
So I don't know, Blake, would you like to respond?
Yeah, so we want to get a representative sample of the public to gauge sort of a real sort of pulse of any type of broad message that TPEP might be sending out, or that all of our different partners are working with. So we'll have a combination of both a sort of more generalized online version of the survey, which will target sort of representative key demographics across the entire watershed, but we'll also supplement it with mail out surveys where we can specifically target underserved and overburdened census tracts, because we know they're less likely to be able to have online access or have the time to participate in a survey, but we know that they are a representative portion of our watershed anyway. So we'll have those sort of two kind of broad general public targets, but also supplementing it with areas that we know are representative, but unlikely to be able to be reached through those more general methods. So those are two kind of tracks for reaching out to the different constituents.
Any additional questions on this one?
One more comment. Yeah. Thank you for breaking this down for our consideration and giving us some time to mull it over. I appreciate the extra time and kind of spoon feeding it
me personally. So I just want to say thank you for this approach. I do appreciate that. You're most welcome.
One quick question. Do you guys, in the sewer lateral one, do you guys have any restrictions on those funds? Because I've tried unsuccessfully to have conversations with the Treasury about, we're getting ready to update our multi-year implementation plan for Restore, and they are adamant that federal dollars cannot be used on that private lateral unless the county or a city were to own it all the way to the house. So if
So this is a test case for us, and so that's part of why we're putting the trial balloon up to EPA to see what the feedback is. So we're not sure is the truest answer I can give you. And
Yeah, just we're probably going to need to work with the partners through this process to understand how the funds could be spent. And similar to the Habitat project, we did put 3 different options of how that funding could be used, and it's not entirely for supporting private portions of the fix that might be needed. So it's not a satisfying answer, I know.
But take a look at it, because part of what we're thinking is if we can help offset, so you have several options in your ordinance for like the find and fix program on the public side, if we can help offset with federal dollars, the public side, so that it frees up local dollars for the private side, that, you know, that's maybe a way to work together. And then also just helping with the monitoring and, you know, effectiveness tracking. Some of those metrics, I know not everybody has the resources to have a good handle on whether or not these programs are working as intended, and that's something that we could certainly support as well. So we did try and build some of that flexibility in there, but take a look at that project and see if there's some different language that you think would support the goals that you're looking for. I know St. Pete's really interested in this one too.
But what if the sewer utility, it's a private utility, not a county one? It's even worse.
I think that's even harder. I think part of the strategy here is to make a case that there's a public benefit and that the private lateral sewer line affects the treatment effectiveness and the capacity of the public wastewater treatment system. And so I think that's a big part of the argument that we make. So I think it's a little bit harder on a private wastewater treatment system. But I think what we're trying to show is that we're willing to do what we can to work through some of these issues all the way up to the feds to see if we can make progress on some of these things that are a little bit stickier that we know are contributing to some water quality challenges throughout our watershed. So harder, but maybe.
There was a question in the chat from Felicia Burks that was asking the timeline for the satisfaction survey. Like,
Yeah, so it's going to go over pretty much a 2.5-year timeline. The goal is that once we, enter the new fiscal year, we'll submit it for the relevant approvals through the EPA, through IRB. It should be a relatively quick process because it is just part of our, customer feedback, so to speak. So that should go relatively quickly, but basically we're looking at about a year for data collection, survey design, those sorts of things. And then we'll go through analysis. That'll be another year. That'll take us right up to the beginning of fiscal year 2027. And that's when we're going to be updating our entire CCMP. And so we'll be able to use the feedback that we have from the Baywide feedback survey to inform, where it is that we'd like to see updates, whether it's goals or actions, or even just strategies when thinking about target audiences and how we choose to communicate with them, or think about topics that are of most need or highest priority in our community. So that's generally kind of the timeline. It's basically a 2.5 year project that we're thinking that leads right up to the CCMP update in 2027.
All right, any additional discussion on this one? All right, so the action, we are recommending that the policy board conceptually approve the draft fiscal year 25 US EPA work plan, proposed new projects and budget. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second? Any additional discussion? All right, hearing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? All right, motion passes. So executive director and staff reports.
Yeah, these go fairly quick. Just want to give you some highlights of activities that occurred over the past quarter since we last met in November. Just to bring you up to speed on the contractor selection for the Old Tampa Bay Southern Lift Capacity Assessment Project. We actually worked with the contractor over the December-January timeframe to finalize the overall agreement. They actually kickstarted the project mid-January, and we've been meeting with them ever since. They're probably going to be introduced to the Nitrogen Management Consortium at the February board meeting, but this contract and the deliverables are basically going to be fast-tracked through the course of this year, and hopefully provide a addendum to the reasonable assurance plan that highlights activities that are needed now to get Old Tampa Bay fully back on track in terms of maintaining consistent water quality and supporting seagrass recovery in that bay segment. So that work is underway as we speak. And there's other supporting activities that I'll be talking about a little bit later in my report. Also wanted to draw your attention in the packet through that digital versions link under the 2024 partner return on investment summaries. This is something that we bring to the February board meetings. Jessica and Carly were instrumental in developing these return on investment documents specific for each of our supporting partner interlocal agreement partners. So you'll see those tailored to each of the specific partners and kind of highlights the overall contributions to the program relative to the leverage funds over the past 3 years. And it's a good measure of sort of the value of the program to each of our partners for the contributions that are solicited through the interlocal agreement. Kind of associated with work that's ongoing in Old Tampa Bay, we're expecting any day now to get a subrecipient agreement from DEP on a new restore grant, which in total equates to about $9.5 million coming to the program. The first phase of that grant funding will support a multi-jurisdictional stormwater master plan for the Old Tampa Bay watershed. We'll be advertising that as soon as we get the subrecipient agreement in place with DEP. So we're hoping to either bring that to the May or August board meetings, depending on the timing and finalization of that agreement. And again, that will look for contractor support to develop that overall plan for Old Tampa Bay, where we can identify specific stormwater retrofits, regional stormwater facilities, or other interventions that would have a measured reduction in terms of nitrogen loads emanating from stormwater to Old Tampa Bay. After completion of that first phase, we will actually get significantly more dollars to actually implement some projects, not only in the Old Tampa Bay watershed, but throughout the Tampa Bay watershed to the tune of $8 million. So that will hopefully support actual implementation and work to construct identified projects that would have a measurable benefit to reduce stormwater loads to Tampa Bay. Also wanted to bring to your attention that the Tampa Bay Environmental Restoration Fund is currently open. We encourage all of our partners to apply for the grant funding. We have about $700,000 available for projects this year. Jessica Lewis just held a webinar actually earlier this week to try to solicit additional project proposals this year. And as was discussed at prior board meetings, there are about 5 priorities that we've identified for this year's funding. This doesn't totally encapsulate everything we'll fund. Anything that is listed in the CCMP would technically qualify, but these were the specific projects we're hoping to prioritize for funding this fiscal year, and they relate to, as I mentioned, some of the past board discussions. So you see, trying to encourage some applications related to artificial turf impacts and research within the region, as well as trying to improve science literacy or support septic to sewer conversions by partners within the watershed. So again, any of our partners, municipal governments, nonprofits, and private entities working with either nonprofits or public agencies are qualified to apply. And those proposals are due by March 13th of this year. I'll jump ahead before the video. I just wanted to mention, Sheila, we have a couple of Give a Day for the Bay events coming up that are listed at the bottom of the page there. We encourage you guys to come out and volunteer the morning of your Saturday on those listed dates at some of our parks and other areas to support the overall removal of invasive species or cleanup of these specific areas. As more events are highlighted, please check out our calendar. If you go to tbep.org and go to the bottom of the page, our full calendar kind of lists our volunteer opportunities moving forward. And then last but not least, we do have sort of a highlight from what's called the Splash of Color event that Maya's been part of through a grant through the National Science Foundation, supporting our Blue Bath Alliance in the region. Should give you a little highlight of a film that was created through that work.
So this is actually going to be, it's about a 7-minute clip.
And give a little bit of background on it.
I don't know if the sound's going to come through. Give me an error. Hold on. So I presented to you all before about some of the work that we're doing through NSF. So we were actually funded for a second phase of the initial exploratory work that we were doing. And essentially the intent of the project, the objective of the project is to look at ways we can expand the audience of folks who are interested and knowledgeable about nitrogen pollution and water quality, and how we can inspire them to act to improve water quality overall. So much of our target audience is focused on frontline communities, specifically Black and Brown folks, and Tampa Bay is one of the pilot locations. So this effort in particular is looking at how we can get people interested in nitrogen pollution through the lens of recreation and mental health, and how that's really important for particular communities, and sort of help make that connection to water quality and nitrogen pollution there. So I'm going to show you about a 7-minute clip from a film that we produced in partnership with Hillary Van Dyke, who is one of our community alliance champions here in the Tampa Bay region. And I think what we said when we screened this event, we had about 130 people show up. The feedback from the surveys, I think, was pretty overwhelmingly positive. And we've already had evidence coming back that people who had never really been engaged with our work before, as a result of seeing this film and feeling welcomed and part of this community, followed up and participated in subsequent cleanup events at Bartlett Park, for example. So that's kind of what this work is trying to do. So I'm gonna hit play.
My parents' avoidance of water in the United States is due to them believing it's dirty and polluted.
I want to say that water pollution has a part in that, and I believe it does, for the people that have a love for those sports.
One example was with Outdoor Afro wanted to go paddleboarding or kayaking, and it got canceled simply because of red tide.
The direct correlation with that is, if one of our favorite pastimes is fishing, and if the fish population is adversely affected or impacted by pollution, then decreases the opportunity that we may have to go out and enjoy what we love to do, which is fishing.
One of the things I found out was that it stimulates overgrowth, and anything overgrowing is not good. When you got overgrowth in the ocean, it makes more algae and more seaweed thing, you know, and it starts to block the light from the reef.
A lot of us are just trying to stay afloat. No pun intended, but a lot of us are just trying to survive. We don't have the luxury of going out and experiencing boating and kayaking and the sea trek experience and the beach. A lot of us, even in South St. Pete, a lot of our youth live within a peninsula and they've never experienced the beach. So for a lot of people that we're just introducing to water safety and swimming, I don't feel like that really is even a thought in their mind because they're just trying to maintain the day-to-day life.
So water pollution doesn't rank very high when we talk about surveys and data and responses from residents and constituents, but it is a very important issue. But a lot of the constituents that we talk with don't really think about water quality so much. You know, it's kind of housing and jobs and public safety are usually issues that rank higher than water pollution.
The things that it would take for more people to care about the nitrogen pollution is actually seeing that pollution in their areas, actually having it affect them in more ways than one.
It's important for us to remember that protecting people and protecting nature are not at odds. I would say a lot of times when a space is exploited, you'll find that the people in that space are also exploited. So to some extent, you really need to think about this conversation together, that when we're protecting nature, when we're thinking about pollution, we're also actually protecting people.
So some of the challenges around air quality that we face and have been working to address in the Childs Park neighborhood was particularly around one one industrial, pre-industrial factory that was releasing, you know, gas or some odor that we were unfamiliar with. And so it was a complaint that was coming for a number of years through residents. And so we started organizing around it, reached out to the county and the city to, you know, just raise up our concerns. And when we heard back from them, the issue that they had, that they presented to us, was that they just didn't receive enough complaints. And so the data that they had didn't support like this robust investigation. And so we created a campaign called Smell Something, Say Something, where we inform residents on what the process is to file a complaint when you smell this odor in your neighborhood, and to be more active in, you know, launching those complaints so that we can have the complaint data and the records to show that this is an issue, it is something that we're concerned about.
Sometimes I think the ones that are closer to the city, they are neglected more. As the traffic has increased, population of people has increased, our pollution has increased, and that includes runoff from the streets from all the cars and the oil and things like that. We get a lot of rain here and a lot of flooding here, but as we continue to industrialize and have more people, when that flooding occurs, I think it does impact a lot of our bays and our ports a lot more than it had been in the past.
So one of the things that's changed with going from community activists to public officials, as it relates to my ability to inform the community about the importance of water and water pollution, is the access to the information that I have.
It's already hard enough getting people into environments that they don't have a positive relationship with, where they've heard horror stories and drowning experiences. It's already hard to build a trusting relationship with these spaces. And I feel like with the pollution on top of that, it gives nobody wants to be in it.
People aren't necessarily concerned with pollution or thinking about algae blooms and red tide. They're really just enjoying that moment in time and having that respite in nature. But it is important for people to remember the fact that if we aren't concerned about some of those things, this moment in time that you really need for your health, for your mental health, might be taken away if we are not cautious, or at least precautious, about what's happening in the water and what's happening on the land. So maybe we aren't concerned with pollution every moment of every day, but really just thinking about the ways that pollution might make it where you can't actually enjoy the space that you're in. And I think that might be the way to get folks to care, is for them to realize to what extent that pollution might take away the space from them.
So that's just a snippet, and it's probably the part of it that's most closely aligned with our work. But some of the feedback that we got at the event from folks that were already working in this space was that they had never really heard this perspective from the community before. They didn't realize that people all didn't think about water quality in the same way. So that's part of why we shared this snippet here today. And I'll just say it was like pretty exciting to be part of that event. I've never really been to an event that was that black, to be perfectly honest, for environmental work. And I think everybody had a whole lot of fun, and some people learned some things. So we're going to continue to do screenings of this film. There's another one scheduled for the Black American Film Festival at the Factory in St. Petersburg on February 23rd. At 7 p.m. And then we're going to do another one at the Center for Health Equity on April 18th during Earth Month. And so if you're interested in hosting a screening with us, this film isn't publicly available as of yet because it is being screened in different film festivals, but we are hosting screening events. And so if you have an audience that you think that this message might resonate with and you're interested in partnering, reach out to me and I can sort of connect with the project team and see if it's something that we can coordinate. We're intending to do two other events related to this work. One that's centered around not just mental health, but your actual health and exposure to toxics and around environmental justice. So we're working with Walter Smith from the city, who's a City of Tampa resident, on some of those issues that are important to him. And then we're also looking at this through the lens of wealth and the blue economy and how we can make these jobs, how we can build a pipeline for young folks who are interested in doing this kind of work or who maybe don't even know that these kinds of jobs exist. And so we're working on setting up a career kind of fair event with the Tampa Heights Junior Civic Association for this summer. So we'll keep reporting to you about some of the outcomes, but that's part of what I've been up to.
That was awesome.
Yeah, it's fantastic work. It's it hits so true to what we see it around the port too. And we've been doing more quarterly harbor tours with the general public, and how lots of the young folks in the underserved communities, that's the first time they've ever been on a boat. And they're scared. I mean, they're scared of the environment. So getting that out there, most of the questions were about sharks. Like, how many sharks are out here? What happened if I fell in the water? It's fantastic.
There are a lot of really negative associations with water quality that many of us know is actually pretty darn good. And so how to build the long-lasting relationships where they trust a scientist who tells them actually, like, you know, what you're thinking about the water maybe isn't true and it is safe enough for you to enjoy. And, you know, I think that's something that's going to take us a while if we really want to work through this. But it's important to also hear those perspectives. And so really grateful to folks like Blake for helping us figure out what to ask and how to track and measure this. And then also just want to express my gratitude and thanks to Jessica. She helped coordinate the logistics of the screening event and was awesome. So.
Yeah, and I just to follow up, I'm very proud of my team and everything that is wrapped up in this video. Among her many talents, she's also executive producer on this film, Maya Burke, helping out with the storyboard and cutting of that film, and it turned out great. And as you heard, it's going to film festivals for consideration of additional awards. So very proud of that work that's come out of this project. That's all for director and staff reports.
Any other comments or questions you have for Ed or Maya or any team? All right, I don't think Ryan, are you on?
I don't think he is.
So, I'll take the technical advisory committee report, which starts on page 13 of your packet. And I'm not going to go through everything. Obviously, there's a number of technical publications. the open science products, presentations listed, and committee meetings. The last technical advisory committee meeting was at the end of January, and we had some great presentations there on wave monitoring up in the upper part of the bay around Philippi Park, the critical coastal habitat assessment result update from 2023, living shoreline standard discussion, and then 2023 State of the Bay. Marcus gave us an update on the open science dashboards and what the water quality is looking like, which everybody has this, I'm sure that it's going to be discussed. I won't steal anybody's thunder. But that was, it was a really great meeting. Again, I'm just gonna, my usual, please encourage people to attend. I don't know how many people who were online for that meeting, but the room was lonely. And we like to see everybody's faces. So please encourage staff to attend, especially those that are just starting their careers. We really need to develop our succession plan here for the Technical Advisory Committee and continuing the love of the science of Tampa Bay. So I'll get off my soapbox now and turn the mic over to Robin for the CAC report.
Hi, I'm delighted to be here. And if I miss something, Sheila's going to help me out because I haven't my first time giving this, but I just want to talk about the Community Advisory Committee. Met 6 times this quarter. And one of the main things that we did was update the criteria for the mini grants. As I understand, hadn't been updated in quite a while. So made some tweaks there that were then they worked on, a subcommittee worked on, and it was accepted by the whole committee by general consensus. We had 17 members of the Community Advisory Committee that volunteered for a total of almost 80 hours. And there were 7 events. Also, as you see, for the mini grants, 14 were completed and 28 are still ongoing. We also had 7 events. So I think that is pretty much what I wanted to mention. So thank you. I have to say that as a reporter, I'm just delighted to be attached to this organization because you guys have been doing such good work for so long. And I don't know if all of you, I don't know if you notice, people recognizing it, but we do. And we just see it even in the water quality. I've been sailing on Manatee River all my life and have seen the changes. And I really put it down to what a lot of you have been doing. And I'm very happy to be just attached in a little bit to this organization. So thank you.
All right. Moving on to does anybody have any questions about either the Technical Advisory Committee or CAC activities? All right. Marcus and Carrie, habitat, seagrass, and water quality updates.
Good morning, everybody. This time of year, I'm usually very busy giving this presentation. At the start of each year, I compile all of the annual data that's we get as a program to really highly synthesize the information we use to assess how healthy the bay is. And it's a very broad statement, and that's inclusive of many different report cards and indicators that we use as a program. And as you heard through the work plan for next year, we're still continuing to develop those indicators because we have good coverage of a lot of the indicators, but not complete coverage of everything we want to look at as a program. So each year I give this presentation, expect it to get a little longer as we develop those indicators. So I like to start with seagrasses. Obviously, this is the bread and butter for us as a program for what we look at in terms of how healthy the bay is. It's an indicator in itself of bay health, but it's also obviously a very great thing for the bay in terms of the habitat it provides and how it can improve or lead to improvements in other habitats. So the big question or the big concern, I guess, we have as a program is the decline in seagrasses we had from 2016 to present. Okay? And so this is showing you basically the results from our transect monitoring efforts. So the 62 transects, I believe, that are monitored by our partners. They go out to different locations and look at different species coverage and abundance. And the good news for this round is that, you know, you do see that drop from around the 2016 time period. But in the last 2 years, we have seen a slight increase in seagrasses. So this is good news. I'm not saying that seagrasses have recovered or are going to continue to recover, but this is a trend in the right direction. And I also don't want this to detract from the work that is ongoing in Old Tampa Bay related to water quality there. As I'll show you actually in this slide, a lot of those gains that we saw with seagrasses were actually in Old Tampa Bay. So we see here's Old Tampa Bay up here. The white line is total species frequency occurrence, and the ones below it are the individual species. So you can see that this increase was quite large in Old Tampa Bay, so that's great. I have some ideas as to why that could be, which I'll talk about in a second related to water quality. But again, this is an encouraging trend as a whole for seagrasses. Hillsborough Bay as well also saw some increases, but Hillsborough Bay, you know, is kind of a much smaller pool of seagrasses compared to Old Tampa Bay. But by and large, Middle Tampa Bay, Lower Tampa Bay, Boca Ciega Bay, relatively stable, but that's pretty standard trend that we're used to seeing over the years. Whenever we see gains and losses in seagrasses, it usually occurs in the upper parts of the bay, particularly Old Tampa Bay and Hillsborough Bay.
And Marcus, I could interject just a couple of thoughts on this. So the Water Management District is currently flying the imagery right now, and similar to what we saw in Sarasota Bay, these transects results give us kind of a peek into the future. So when it's recovering, it may not be enough for us to capture it on that imagery. So we don't expect that this improvement is going to be captured with this mapping event. But it shows signs of recovery for future mapping events, which is what we're expect to see in Sarasota Bay with this mapping event as well. So it's been a challenging year collecting the aerial imagery because it's typically a quiet, if not windy time of year, not rainy. So it's been challenging finding days that we can actually get out and capture that imagery. But the imagery that is coming back so far has been excellent. So that is hopeful for some really confident results. And that would be forthcoming probably within a year because it'll go through the QA/QC process. So I just wanted to add.
Yeah, that's good detail. And I actually, when I gave this presentation to the TAC, I started with the biennial seagrass results from the district, but we haven't had an update since 2022. So I just wanted to show the transect data as kind of an interim product, which you rightfully acknowledge is kind of how we use it. But our standard for seagrass coverage does come from the aerial estimates. And we are looking to receive the next round sometime next year.
Yeah, so, and they work hand in hand. So it's really great to see the results and get a sneak peek, hopefully, to what we expect to see.
And I did email Chris A the other day about the flights, and it was, I think, 2 or 3 days ago, they were flying Hillsborough or Tampa and Sarasota. So. Okay, so on to water quality. This is the flagship product that we give you every year. There's a printout on your table there showing the results. But I like to remind people that this report card kind of serves 2 purposes. The first side being sort of a management-oriented purpose, looking more holistically at water quality habitats that promote seagrass growth. And then the other side is more of a regulatory assessment, how it relates to our TMDL through the Nitrogen Management Consortium and a reasonable assurance agreement with FDEP. So to cut to the chase, everything's green again this year. Good job, guys. That's great. And I'm also gonna just say that this is probably because we had a very, very dry year. So again, this is good information, but I wouldn't say that this is necessarily a turn in the right direction for Old Tampa Bay in particular. But, you know, if you went out on the bay this year, Old Tampa Bay, it was just phenomenal water clarity, great conditions, and we saw that reflected in our water results for the bay. So we have chlorophyll is the first two columns showing what we saw in 2023 relative to the target, and then light penetration, same for 2023 relative to the target. So we met the target. This is our management target on the first side of the page, how that was met this year. So this is the long-term trend. You know, again, for the last 10 years or so, the bay has had, you know, has been in the green category. And green isn't just mean good. It does have a narrative association with it that is meant to sort of motivate you guys to continue the great work you're doing. But again, just to draw your attention to Old Tampa Bay, for the last 10 years, most of the time it's been in that yellow category. And again, this relates to both chlorophyll and light attenuation, how those two things interact to affect light environments for seagrass growth. And there is, you know, this, the way this is calculated, it is kind of, it's not just whether or not the target was met in a given year, but how long in the previous couple of years up to a given year has that condition persisted. So there's an exceedance in duration related to these scores. The regulatory outcomes, very similar, but this differs because it's only based on chlorophyll concentrations as defined in our TMDL with the EPA, or rather how it's working with the DEP through our program. But basically, yes, you know, there's concurrence with this report card relative to the management report card. That's not surprising, but this is more just how we respond to the NMC, the Nitrogen Management Consortium, in terms of chlorophyll exceedances each year. So the last 2 years, again, we met the threshold for chlorophyll, which is good. Looking a little more closely at some of the long-term trends, you know, you've seen these graphics before, but this is just showing you chlorophyll trends over time, annual averages for major bay segments. And we see the long-term recovery of the bay, but what jumps out at me with these plots is that, you know, this is 2023, this terminal year here. And I think all but one case, Lower Tampa Bay, this was the lowest chlorophyll annual average concentration that we've seen in the entirety of the period of record that we've been tracking this through EPC's data. So that's notable in and of itself. And seasonally, you know, when we do have these annual exceedances, whether it's the management targets or the regulatory thresholds, obviously these tend to happen in the late summer, early fall period when, you know, primary productivity is highest. And so places like Old Tampa Bay, we tend to look at the August, September, July time period. We tend to see those pyrididium blooms or other algal species when their growth is highest. We saw basically, again, fairly low summer chlorophyll concentrations, which again is, I think, a reflection of the low rainfall we had this year. So red points are this year, and then the box plots and all the other points are basically all the other years back to 1975. So overall long-term improvement, but this year in particular, very, very low seasonal chlorophyll levels.
Can I add something, Marcus?
Yeah.
So one of the, you know, things that we've hypothesized as a technical advisory committee is that maybe in column like phytoplankton growth isn't the only kind of algae that we need to be concerned with. We should also be thinking about macroalgae. And so I just wanted to call your attention, if you look at the Seagrass Transect dashboard, you'll see maybe not the best characterization of all macroalgae, but with respect to Caulerpa in particular, we also saw declines in the amount of Caulerpa in those bay segments where we thought it might be out competing. So for some of those folks that are interested in that question about a macroalgae pathway, we also saw declines in Caulerpa. So.
Yeah, and this did come up in discussion with the TAG. There's recording online, you could listen to it, but yeah, that is a concern, you know, these alternative pathways for nutrients. And I think some of the work we're doing with the assimilative capacity study with Old Tampa Bay is going to look at some of those relationships and see if there's an alternative approach to understanding how we think about water quality in Old Tampa Bay. So again, you know, these water quality trends we've seen in the last 2 years. I don't even know if I'd call it a trend, but the actual conditions we saw. Obviously, I think, this year was driven primarily by just the lack of rainfall we had in our watershed. So right now, and the last, I guess, 15 or 20 years, stormwater runoff has been the primary source of nutrients into the bay. And so obviously, years when we have high rain or low rain, it's going to have a huge effect on the amount of nutrients entering the bay, which then translates into changes in primary productivity and chlorophyll concentrations we see. So I put together this plot just because I was curious how tight the relationship was. This is annual rainfall from the district's rainfall estimates, and this is chlorophyll down here. And so they're not, one-to-one, because there are obviously other things that are affecting chlorophyll besides rain, but you do see this, not super clean, but definitely a positive relationship between chlorophyll and rain. And so if you look at 2023, it's all the way at the bottom left. And so to me, an extreme outlier for how not only we saw chlorophyll in the bay this year, but how it relates to just the lack of rainfall we got. The other question we have, particularly when we look at like Old Tampa Bay, is in the last 10 years when we do see those chlorophyll exceedances, it tends to be related to years when we had large pyridinium blooms. And so I really like this graphic because it kind of shows the progression of pyridinium seasonally between years and spatially in Old Tampa Bay. And I actually got to give credit to Carrie Lopez for this graphic. She's the one that usually shows the trends this way, but you can see, basically, so we have space, latitude on the y-axis. So if you think about Old Tampa Bay, going from the south all the way up to the north, and then season on the x-axis, and then each facet is a year. So you can see how it changes in these multiple dimensions over time and space. And the dotted lines are basically where the bridges are. So Gandy, Howard Franklin, and Courtney Campbell from bottom to top. And I showed a similar graphic last year. So this is 2022. We still saw pyridinium, not as high concentration as it was in 2021. And then looking at 2023, we still have pyro, but again, even less abundant than in previous years. So I like to show this because one, it kind of somewhat explains the lower chlorophyll concentrations we saw this year, but I also like to make the point that pyridinium is still there. It's not going to go away, and I think it does obviously respond to changes in rainfall, just like the other algal species we see in the bay. So the fact that we had a dry year doesn't mean that next year, if we have a wet year, chlorophyll is going to stay the same as it did this year. So just want to bring that up. This is also kind of another way to look at it, the pyridinium trends. This is actually showing for Old Tampa Bay as a whole, what are the median cell concentrations in a given year and how they relate to our management outcomes on our report card. So the colors basically show the assignment for Old Tampa Bay on the first page in any given year. So again, this year we had, or this year and the previous we had, green years, we were doing good. Pyridinium concentrations were below the long-term median. But the other thing I like to mention about this is that even though pyridinium is a driver of some of the chlorophyll trends, it's not always as correlated with the outcome as other factors that might be driving chlorophyll. So you have years when pyridinium is low or high, but it doesn't necessarily correspond to green, yellow, or red, but it is related to those in a way. Okay, so as far as like take home for seagrasses and water quality, we're obviously hopeful that the trends we saw in 2022 and this year in particular are suggesting of a long-term improvement, but again, it's obviously very closely related to sort of the seasonal changes we see in rain. And I also just want to mention that yes, drought is not a management strategy, so we can't always count on that as something that's going to occur every year and how that's going to influence water quality. So there's other things obviously that we can control, like nitrogen loads from point sources, or even somewhat from stormwater through basin improvements like Ed was talking about, the DEP projects that are going to be coming down the line. And I just want to say that, we need to just stick to what we're doing as a program, continue the nitrogen load reduction efforts, but also pay attention to the work that is going to be going on in Old Tampa Bay this year for the assimilative capacity study. I think next TAC meeting and definitely some of the NMC meetings, we're going to have our contractor talk to these groups and sort of update them on their progress and what they're thinking with alternative indicators or other approaches that can augment the existing management paradigm in Old Tampa Bay. Okay, the last couple of slides that I have here are speaking to other aspects of the Bay that we also monitor and report on regularly. As I said, we're going to continue to build out this portfolio, but right now I'm going to talk about some of the more routine indicators that we've been tracking over time. So this is showing you long-term trends in our Nectin index. So looking at how the health of the fishery has changed over time. It also includes some invertebrates. And we know that, obviously fish being sentinels of their environment, they're going to respond to stressors in their environment as well. So this does respond to changes in water quality and habitat degradation. And you might notice down here that I'm showing 2022. This actually lags 1 year behind the current year. So we got 2020 data a couple months ago in 2023. And so it's just a year behind just because it takes a long time to process that information. But what's notable here is that in 2022, this was the first year we had where all bay segments had a yellow. And again, yellow does have a narrative component to it that is meant to sort of define how we approach managing the fishery community based on these outcomes. But again, this is the first year since 2008 where all bay segments were yellow. And the reason we think this has occurred is because this is an index that does show response to changes in water quality. And so if you remember 2021, Piney Point, and even winter of 2022, we did see some red tide. So this index, if you go back to the original paper, is very responsive to red tide and how that affects the fisheries community. So we think that's why we're seeing that. But the fisheries community is fairly resilient. We do kind of expect them to kind of bounce back over the next couple of years, but it does show some pretty tight relationships with red tide when it gets into the bay. The next one is benthic. So this is looking at basically the health of the benthos, the sediments, and the organisms that live in and around them in the bay. This is coming from EPC, and much like the Nectin index, this is also a year behind, so I'm reporting on 2022 results because this takes an incredibly long time to process all those little critters in the lab. But story here is, we do see some kind of variation between the bay segments from year to year, but the trends have largely been the same across the 4 bay segments for the last 10 years or so. Obviously, Old Tampa Bay, Hillsborough Bay, up in the northern part of the bay where we see a lot of our major inflows. Those are going to be the areas that have had a lot of the historical impacts related to just contaminants that come in from the watershed and get, sort of buried in the sediments there. So this is not surprising. This is a fairly common scenario you see in a lot of estuaries, but could be the focus of future restoration efforts if we choose to do something like that. Okay, so those are the main biological indices. I also like to report on basically efforts for restoration. And, obviously this is a partner-driven effort that we try to promote through our program, through just motivating them through presentations like this or through direct allocation of resources through our work plan or other means. But each year we like to report on all the great work that all of our partners are doing with habitat restoration. And this is showing a breakdown of basically how it looked last year by the major habitat types, the native habitat types we have in our watershed, as well as intertidal and subtidal areas. And this is how our habitat master plan breaks up the habitats. We have total projects on the left, total acreage in the middle, and then total miles, because some of these things are tracked in linear distances. And this trend is fairly common again from year to year. We see a lot of projects focusing on the uplands. We have actually 2 different types of uplands, non-coastal and coastal. If you remember our habitat master plan update, kind of partitioned them separately as a function of how coastal versus non-coastal might be differently impacted by sea level rise. But point is, we see a lot of work in uplands, so this is like forested areas, other work in wetlands, seagrasses, mangroves, you name it. Another note here about total acreages, this is a lot of acres, 31,000 acres, and that's partly a reflection of how we categorize our different restoration projects. This isn't like direct acquisition or restoration in its entirety for uplands. It does include things like maintenance or enhancement. So this could mean like, you know, invasive species removal or controlled burns, that kind of thing. So it is kind of a somewhat inflated number that it could be misleading, but we also do recognize those other types of activities that are meant to sort of enhance, eventually restore these habitats. How this compares to previous years, this is just showing last year to 2022 to 2021 in terms of number of projects. We're actually up almost double of the number of projects we had compared to last year. I don't remember why we had kind of less effort in 2022, but we're still happy to see that jump. And again, the breakdown by major habitat types. So our hope is that obviously through all of these restoration projects, there will be a translation to gains in our goals and targets for the native habitats in our habitat master plan. So all of the work that is done here will translate to short-term and long-term gains in the different habitats where we have defined goals for each of those. And so about a year and a half ago, we created yet another report card to sort of synthesize a ton of data into hopefully what is a easily distillable portrayal of how we're doing towards these long-term targets and goals. And this is a reflection of basically our short-term 2030 targets that are defined for the different native habitats in the Habitat Master Plan update. So we have basically 3 different strata in terms of how we think about these habitats. Subtidal habitats, that's the left column, and then intertidal in the middle, so the coastal margin, intertidal wetlands, and then supertidal, so up in the watershed. So we track all of these different habitats relative to these strata, and basically each year shows how we're doing towards attaining the short-term goal in 2030 of basically the coverage we hope to achieve for these different habitats. We also have long-term goals, or long-term goals, short-term targets, I always get it backwards. But long-term, we have 2050 goals as well. We hope to achieve these different habitats. And basically, you know, the colors are meant to portray the trends as well as whether or not the short-term target for 2030 has been met. And so this is a little bit different than our water quality report card. There's aspects of, again, whether or not the target is currently met in a given year, and is that trend from one year to another likely to obtain that target in 2030 or not. So you can see the breakdown in the different categories. So red is basically the target is not met in a given year, and based on the trend from a given year and the previous year, it's not likely to be met. Yellow is the target is met, but we're trending towards obtaining that target. Light green is it's not met yet, but we're trending towards meeting that target. And then dark green is the best, it's met, and we're continuing to exceed that target. So a couple things to point out here. Seagrasses, you know, this was what I was talking about at the very beginning. They've declined since 2016. That's a big concern for us as a program. Intertidal wetlands. Oh, and the numbers are basically the proportion of the target that is met in any given year. So above 1, it's met. Below 1, it's not met. Failed to mention that. Total intertidal is down, and that's primarily a function of loss of salt marshes and being replaced by mangroves. That's a phenomenon that I think we're well aware of at this point, but is of concern for us because we do have goals for that. And then freshwater wetlands continue to be lost to basically development in the watershed. So even just distilling this further, this is just kind of a breakdown we like to share with our partners with where the priorities should be focused with different restoration projects moving forward based on the information we get. As I said, the things to prioritize are basically seagrass habitats, salt marsh habitats, freshwater wetlands. We're not meeting the targets, and it's looking like, based on the trends, that it's continuing to be lost over the years, at least recently. So that's where we want to focus our efforts. Things where we think that, we've done a lot of good work that we need to basically keep doing are things like oyster bars. We have some fairly aggressive targets and goals for oyster acreage coverage in the bay, but because of a lot of the good restoration work, we're trending in a direction that looks like we're going to meet the targets and goals. Same for uplands. We're doing a lot of great work there, even in the coastal margin where we're looking at them as well. And then other things, mangroves, basically we say they're doing fine because they're just expanding on their own. They don't need any help at this point. We do have targets and goals for them, but they've just trended over the last 20, 30 years in a direction that is basically indicative of how they're responding to or expanding as a result of climate change. So at this point, mangroves are doing good. In the future, might be a different question, but for now, they're good. So a lot of information. I know that's a very high level overview, but that's, how the bay is doing. Water quality is good. Seagrasses are hopefully going in a positive direction. And yeah, we continue to do the work that we're doing. So
back to the restoration projects that were done by partners or in the watershed, do you include compensatory mitigation projects and regulatory required preservation, restoration, or like how are you different? What are we including in this?
So the annual reporting that you see here is what we report to the EPA through their estuary program reporting process, and mitigation projects are not included in that. Okay. So there are other restoration efforts that are happening within the watershed, and that would be a great conversation to have on how we can incorporate that, because right now we're just taking what we're officially bringing in for EPA reporting and putting it through the support card, because that's the easiest.
That's being reported by the member agencies?
Yeah, so it's voluntary, and we put out a call to all our partners to report their projects, and then we enter them into the EPA database. If you've gone to some of our Habitat Restoration Consortium meetings, we recently put together an online submittal form. So what had happened in the past, we were sending out Excel sheets to our partners, and then they would send it back, and we have to compile them. So now we've got kind of an online form that'll make it easier for us and easier for you, hopefully, for all the projects you're going to be reporting.
Yeah, thank you. Just to add to that, if we continue, I think, to struggle with the connection between activities in the bay that are reported either through direct restoration or mitigation activities, and ultimately what is expressed through the land use land cover information. We recognize that, some of this work, you're not going to get a salt marsh next year when a photo opportunity might take place to, delineate a land use land cover information. So that's why we show you these two sets of information, both the activity and then how it might be reflected in the land use land cover information in this decision matrix. We recognize it's probably going to be like 5 to 10 years from those mitigation activities or restoration activities to fully see mappable habitats. So we continue to have that conversation with the Restoration Consortium, but if you have ideas of how we can better express that in terms of our annual updates, we're still all ears.
First, thank you for the presentation, the compilation of all that data, and I think the way it's visually very helpful. So I love all the graphics.
Appreciate that.
Question is, what goes into the Necton index?
So it's, I'll let Carrie chime in, but it's a multi-metric index. So it's looking at different indicators from the fisheries community, like species richness, diversity, abundance of different indicator taxa, kind of synthesizes it into, I think it varies from 0 to 100, but it's a combination of things. And being that, fish are obviously responding in their environment, it's meant to be sort of just another line of evidence of their response to stressors in their environment. Okay.
Yeah, and to follow up on that, the fish and invertebrates that are included in that index are all small-bodied fish and invertebrates. So not like the larger ones that might be moving around a little bit more freely within the estuary, but the smaller ones that are associated with their individual habitats. So, they're kind of a better indicator of some of these, stressors in their spatial environment.
There is a red category, but I guess the fish have been doing overall. Never gone on the red. You can go on the dashboard and actually see the breakdown of all the metrics that go into the overall score. You can click on an individual site and see what was surveyed basically in any given year, how it relates to the index.
All right. Any additional questions for Marcus? None. I do want to thank you for all the work that you've been putting into this, Marcus. You've been inspiring Alex over in our team in Pinellas County. And
just Alex?
And I've been seeing all of these lovely dashboards that look oddly familiar and will be on our website coming soon. So thank you for inspiring the generation of open science. And we're seeing a lot of neat stuff on our team as well. So it's very cool.
We're all inspired, we just can't all do it.
Yes, Alex starts talking and I'm like, bring it down, Alex, bring it down.
See, you just need an Alex, and then it's easy to work with them in that environment, even if you can't do everything that they can do, I'd say. Because I'm, I can do it. We work together in there.
We work together well enough. We made it work. And I mean, that applies to everybody on the team.
So, yeah, I'm just like, dumb it down, Alex, dumb it down. Kelly level here. But no, it's really, really inspiring stuff. So
thank you.
All right, Maya, informational item?
As you know, we are managing a lot of projects all the time, and if you want more details on the progress towards finishing up all of those different projects, Ed's got a link up on the screen to the dashboard. You can drill down into individual programs and projects for more information. If you haven't clicked around in there and you want a little bit of help on how to navigate it, I'm happy to do so, but there's quite a bit of work going on in this dashboard, I think, is summarizing it for you. Other than that, the next meeting is scheduled for May 17th in this room. I do want to also say that the Regional Planning Council has notified us that they have a conflict in this room now that has popped up for our August meeting. So if anyone has a space they would like to offer for the August meeting, I'm open. So let me know if you've got something that could work and accommodate the size group. That's it.
I have a couple of announcements, just more sharing information. I mentioned that we're getting ready to update our multi-year implementation plan, and I know Pasco has one and Hillsborough has one for Restore Act, but one of the things that we are prioritizing is under the goal of reducing pollution from wastewater discharges into the bay through septic connection to sanitary. And one of the approved uses of those dollars is actually the removal and proper abandonment of the septic tank. So we'll be allocating a lot of funds to that. We have a partnership with the city of Dunedin where we are going to pay for that component of a project where they are bringing a community, phase one of a community online to sewer. And so we will pay for that portion. And then, I mean, they'll still have to pay for their own lateral, and the city has some other connection fees that they'll work with them on a payment plan for, but the big piece of it, the actual abandonment of that tank, we're going to pay for through Restore Act dollars. We're also working with our Pinellas County utilities, the same thing. They have a program, and we're going to set aside some dollars to do that. And so for other, going to be reaching out to some of the other utilities in the county where we know there are septic within their service area and offer that as well. So we're going to really try to put a lot of those Restore Act dollars towards that. It's a good way to get rid of a lot of those.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I've heard from other municipalities, when they're doing that route of septic to sewer investments. Have you had resistance from homeowners for the conversions so far?
So the city of Dunedin, like on this project that we've been working on with them for a long time, initially, I mean, these folks are complaining that they cannot flush the toilet when it's raining. They can't, they have to moderate when they can use their water. The biggest thing was when they laid out estimated costs on how much it's going to cost per property to convert. But when we erased, I was at their city council meeting to present on the 23rd after all the pushback. But when we presented that we would cover all of those costs, not one person got up and complained. So we're really going to try to, the city of Dunedin is, so this is an unincorporated enclave. You know, the out for the homeowner is if the cities require annexation to connect, then the city will give them another septic permit. So the city of Dunedin waived that requirement so that we can get them on sewer. They are going to be required to connect, but there will be no annexation requirement. That's a decision they can make on their own in their own time if they feel like they want to become part of the city at a later date. But and we're also going to say like the money is going to be available for a certain amount of time because we want them to take advantage of it. If we just never say, well, whenever you want, all those septic tanks out there failed, 100% failed. We got a report from the health department. No permits have been pulled in that area, and I'm not since like 1980 something. It's like a repair here, a pump out there, but no replacements since the neighborhood was constructed. So they're all failed. So anyway, I just wanted to put that out there. You know, we've been struggling with how to proceed with our multi-year implementation plan. The update, I mean, we went through a batch of projects. Now we've got more funds and really want to try to narrow down the number of projects because the administration, as you guys all know, is incredibly labor intensive. And but we also wanted to focus on CCMP goals overall. So you'll see more of that when we have to put out our MYIP for 45-day comment. So please be positive about that piece. I also just wanted to say that at the next board meeting, the Board of County Commissioners is hopefully, fingers crossed, going to approve approximately $3 million to complete a 41-acre restoration in the northern segment of the Whedon Island Preserve. So we're going to be doing removing a lot of mosquito ditching and doing some habitat restoration in that section. So there may be some funding for matching for what you guys were talking about there. We do have some money from DEP, a small amount, and a small amount from the Water Management District as well, but the overwhelming majority is coming from the Penny Brook Mills. That one.
Yeah, that project is actually listed in fiscal year 2023 as a match project.
Okay, matched. Okay, so there may be a little bit more because it came in high. And then on the watershed management plan stuff, I just wanted to share that we just did a write-up for NOAA. They asked us, they saw that we were using this new data layer that they have made available for impervious data. The LiDAR products that we use collectively in the area, in some areas it's underestimating the directly connected impervious areas. So we have been supplementing with the NOAA data to improve that layer so that it's more accurate. So I just wanted you guys to know that it's out there, and we've been using it to update our watershed management plan so that the impervious layers are more accurate.
The 1 meter CCAP.
I believe so, yeah. I can send you the write-up that Rob Burns did. So I just wanted to share that. Any other sharing anyone would like to do? Yes.
To save the date, we have our 4th annual Great Port Cleanup coming up on April 26th. Started it with Keep Tampa Bay Beautiful and the Propeller Club about 3 years ago. And it's usually on Earth Day week. So we have a charity golf tournament the week of. Been highly successful. Last year we had 851 volunteers, removed 79,500 pounds of trash in 2 hours. So we're shooting for 1,000 people this year. So we'd love to have our partners bring in some teams. EPC's had a big team the last 3 years. City of Tampa's getting very involved, but we'd love to have the estuary program, Water Management District, DEP on board. It's really making a difference. We focused on McKay Bay. Some of those mangroves have never been cleaned in 50, 60 years, and it's incredible how much trash is in there. So it's a great day. There's usually a party afterwards with Kona Brewing, and it's fun. It's Friday morning, hoping for a low tide so we can get in those mangroves. But yeah, it's a great event. We'd love to have you guys participate.
So do you sign up like as a team?
Yeah. That's kind of how I've organized it, is that Keep Tampa Bay Beautiful will open up some sites for the general public, like at DeSoto Park, not Fort DeSoto, but DeSoto Park in McKay Bay, Davis Island. We're going to probably expand it this year. And then I've been recruiting individual like site captains. So Sheila, maybe you'll be a site captain. Then you recruit your team, give us t-shirt sizes, and then all the volunteer waiver forms will go to you. And what I've done that's been really successful is I go out like the month beforehand and I find the locations where all the trash is. Rather than just going to the same parks and the same shorelines and get cleaned every 6 months or 3 months, I'm finding those sites that are just trash, that have never been cleaned. It's really worked out great. So we'd love your support.
Any other announcements or sharing? No? All right, so we'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you.